It's important to start with something of an introduction to the whole idea of Vaad and Musar and working on Middos. In the Rambam we find Hilchos Deos. Now, generally speaking, when we use the word Deos, that is referring to hashkafa, an outlook on life. What the Rambam calls Hilchos Deos are the halachas of Middos. Middos are essentially behavioral. In fact, in common usage, we talk about there's Deos and Middos. Deos is one's hashkafa. Middos is one's character. They're two totally different things. So someone who's a non-believer would be an apikoros, meaning his deos are not in sync with the Torah. But he could have very good middos. On the other hand, someone whose belief system is great, he's just an awful human being. We would say that his deos are fine and his middos are off. The Rambam goes and calls Middos Deos, which would mean that the Rambam believes that all behavioral traits are rooted in underlying attitudes on life. Meaning, depending on the way you're wired, the way you think, that's the way you experience life and react. You process what's going on around you on the basis of your attitudes. They are responsible for your character. Well, if that's the case, it would make sense that the Rambam would then come along and tell us that if you want to improve on your middos, these are the attitudes that you have to start developing. This is the way you're supposed to look at life. Yet when we start reading the Rambam in Hilchos Deos, everything is behavioral. He defines what are good middos, being right in the middle. Not too extreme to either direction. And then the Rambam talks about the way we work on our middos. If you find that in one midah you are extreme, go to the other extreme, eventually you'll end up in the middle. Friends, the Rambam is dealing with them totally from a behavioral perspective. So after the Rambam named them Deos, which did let us know that these are attitudes, he then deals with them in practice as behavioral only. And the answer must be that you need both, and that's what the Rambam is telling us. Of course, if your attitudes are off, you've got to correct them. But correcting them in your brain won't do the trick. Because our character is so much part of whom we are. If we don't change our habits, we may be able to change our attitudes temporarily, but it's not going to last. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, when he founded the Musar movement, taught us that if you want to change a midah, It is important to study all the different Ma'amorei Chazal, the different things that we find in Torah Shebaal Peh, dealing with that particular midah. He also speaks about Cheshbon HaNefesh very strongly, which is really keeping record of how you've been. So altogether, the process of Tikkun HaMiddos must involve both elements. Number one, where is my thinking off? Why do I get angry? What is it in my brain that gets me angry? In other words, what is it that's wrong with the way I am processing the situation that it brings me to anger? What is it about a certain situation that in my brain makes me feel offended? It's got to begin there. If you don't change the way you process things, then you've never really dealt with the root of the problem. Now, the second part is behavioral, which is once you have the conviction that my attitude is off, you've developed the proper attitude. You now have to monitor yourself and see to it that you change your habits. If your behavior remains the same, your processing will slip back into its old habits as well. So the two are necessary and constantly necessary. This is really the avoda that is called for in the individual. What is the idea of a Vaad, of a group working together? So first of all, we find this throughout the Torah, that everything that's done as a group, there's more siyata d'shmaya, Hashem is there. With regard to all of Talmud Torah, we find the difference between an individual, two people, a rabbin, a whole group of people, the level of Shekhinah, how much Hashem's presence is going to be felt, the siyata d'shmaya, the help from heaven that is necessary, certainly is more abundant when you're dealing with not doing this alone. In practical terms, when we work on ourselves, unless you're self-disciplined, it usually peters out. In a group, there's a momentum. In working in a group, there are dangers. And that is that there is a tendency to not be totally honest in the way we report back. Out of embarrassment. So first of all, this is not a group confession session. What you share is hardships that you want advice on. But all in all, the key is to maintain the momentum so that you can do the inner work yourself. You wanted to be dishonest? You are fooling no one other than yourself. There's a real goal here. We all want to change. We all want to grow. We want to shake our negative middos. We want to shake our negative behavior. without real integrity, being honest to yourself and being honest to the people that you're working with, it's just not going to work. For your own sake. Also being part of a Musar Vaad, because it's so much more concrete. Things are verbalized, they're spoken out. Number one, they're much more clear to one. And number two, because there's real action that's involved in your life on a regular basis, you can maintain an awareness of it all the time. Tikkun HaMiddos calls for an awareness. Very often, we are unaware of our own behavior. So sometimes because we're oblivious to it, and of course, getting together and talking about it would sensitize you to more situations. But the other one is that we're just not so present when we're living. We're not so present when we're interacting with others. Things are matter of fact. We don't realize, what did I say? What did this mean? What was going on inside myself? Getting angry doesn't necessarily mean that you exploded. The momentum that is created in working in a group, hopefully, will make one more sensitive, hearing more and more from one another about the different levels and the different forms, will make one much more sensitive and self-aware. You cannot work on your character when you don't have self-awareness. Working in a group really helps that. So once again, the purpose of Musar Vaad is really to accommodate every individual's personal inner work. The inner work, once again, has two parts to it. Part number one is understanding what's right and understanding what it is in our brain. Exactly what it is in our brain that gets us to process situations in a way that it invokes anger, feeling offended, being sensitive, being stubborn. That's one, and that has to be very clear. And studying that is like studying any other part of Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's studying a sugya. You have to attain clarity in as much depth as possible. The second part of it is developing an awareness and really keeping something of a ledger or diary of how you've been on that subject. The key is not to walk around taking notes about your behavior for the rest of your life. The key is to change the way you think, change the way you behave, and creating for yourself a new nature. It's shaking the old habits and developing new ones, beginning with the way you process all the way to your behavior. All right, that's the intro. It's worth investing whatever you can, not just the amount of time that's called for, but to really give it your all and trying to understand yourself and trying to understand where you're going wrong and trying to understand and feel how great it is when you think right. May Hashem help that everybody, all of us here, we are all going to become greater people. The truth is that working on any one midah then affects all. The Chazon Ish writes There are two kinds of people. There are people that work on themselves and people that don't work on themselves. Becoming part of this process means that you now have become one of these people who works on himself, which means that you can be self-critical, you can be open to criticism, you're self-aware, you can realize that things have to be changed, and really investing in one particular midah is going to spread to the rest of your character. And Hashem should help. We should all really grow in every way.